This video, we're just simply trying to color up our black and white image just to add some texture and depth to what it is that we're creating. The first step is really to define some shadow lines. So we're going to be doing an early day, and therefore the sun is coming from the south angle. And as a south angle, the shadows will be to the north. So I'm trying to create some consistency. I'm going to start with some of the trees and highlight some of the areas. So I'm using a digital marker in this particular case, and it's almost like a highlighter where it allows some of the colors that are below it, or in this case the black line work below it, to shine through. And I'm trying to create these patterns in the same direction. So it gives that effect of the sun angle coming in at the project. And all I'm doing in here is going through the color palette that's already created. There's a grid palette that's created. And then I'm making sure that I'm moving down the opacity so it shows the color below it as well as the line work. And I'm just repeating myself. And some of these effects will be very well created and others will be, slightly more. But by the time we add all the different colors to the project, it really will blend together and your eye will trick you into believing the imagery to be more realistic than the details that you've put in. So I'm adding darker colors. Now with this digital media, if I go over top of the same color twice, it darkens it up even more. And you can see the overlaps that are created by that effect. It doesn't have to be perfectly neat. It can be, as you can see in this particular case, even slightly messy. And that will actually add to the texture and the quality of the imagery. So I'm just quickly putting up all the shadows and lines. And at this point, it doesn't look all that great. But as time will go on with the different elements I'm putting in, it'll actually look far more impressive. So here, I'm just blending in a bit more of the dark elements into the tree line so it gives a bit more of that quality of texture. And this requires just a bit of practice, that's all. And I'm kind of just filling in some of the lighter areas, and some of the trees may have a bit more dark areas in it, other ones will have less, and so on. So once I'm kind of happy with the trees, and I can always go back to any of the elements and add to it, I'm going to identify the area of the turf or the grass or the sod that I'm going to be playing with this project, and I'm using a different technique. Rather than a highlighter, here I'm going to use what they call a pencil crayon. So it gives that effect of crayon. So there's a bit more texture to it. As you know, grass obviously has a lot of texture to it, and it will show up a bit nicer than a marker. And so as I'm going through the areas, I'm just highlighting some of the curbs and where there's a transition between different elements. And you can see again, whether I go over top of other lines or not, it's not important at this point. It's just to facilitate the textures and the color differences between elements. And that's all I'm doing here is highlighting or outlining these particular elements. And the crayon has a nice sort of effect that it adds those different dots or pigments to the line work to give it that rough edge or that rough look. And I may go over a couple of areas a couple times. I may want to just highlight some small little sections of it. It's just to give some fill or some texture. So the crayon, as opposed to the highlighter, has that effect. And we can, again, adjust the opacity so that the crayon has that sort of texture and you can still see the line work below. Now I'm going to look at the pool. And in the pool, I'm still using the same sort of effect for texture. And you can see as I overlap, I get darker areas. So I'm trying to look at it, okay, if the sun's coming from the south, I'd probably get a darker surface area or darker texture area closer to the bottom of the pool or the south side of the pool, and lighter as we move forward. So now I'm going to add some depth of color. And there really is no key to this. I'm just using the grid that's already manually there. See this grid here, I didn't make it, it just comes with the program, and I'm just using different colors within that grid spectrum. And because they are within that spectrum, they're very closely associated to one another. So here again, I just added a bit of texture to the pool. It's just to add coloration, and therefore we can actually see what it is. So the next one, I'm going to add some color to some of the different surrounding stonework. Now I don't know what interlocking stone I'm going to be using for the pool surround. So rather than guess at this point, I'm simply using a basic color of gray, and that will give me some type of texture with the pool surround. I'm pretty safe with gray because if I go with the concretes, they're basically gray. If I go with any of the paving stones, they have that sort of gray tone to it. So I want to see some contrast. So here I'm selecting a brown tone and I'm going over the pergola now to the right to identify the pieces of it. And then as I work with that pergola, I'm going to see how that effect comes together. And it's to simply define the wood structure or the woodwork in the pergola. And I'm also using that color tone in the chairs or the lounge chairs that are there. So you can see the table, the chairs, and then I'm going to pick up really heavily on the pergola. So between the brown and the gray, it should stand a bit more out as an element that is more clearly defined. So here I'm using a pen, a more fine-tuned pen, which gives me a narrower thickness to it, and therefore I can clearly outline some of these elements. And you can see as I add the line work to the project, I've created shadows at the lounge chairs to the left of it, and now I'm going to overline the pergola. You can see as I'm drawing over top of the pergola, the actual ceiling joists and the lintel and the posts, it gives it just a bit more thickness, so it pops out a bit. So just by adding 2-3 colors to an item, you can see it kind of pop out. Now I'm at the gazebo and I'm outlining the edges of the gazebo. Now the gazebo was made see-through so that we can see that this was designed for a seating arrangement. Now this isn't necessarily a perfect top view because it is identifying some transparency to it. We don't typically have that in a gazebo, but I want to show the furniture that's underneath it, or in this particular example, the individual wanted to show the furniture underneath it. So I'm going to fill in the triangular blocks with some fill that will match the deck as well. So here I am, I'm playing with colors, seeing how it works, doing some installation, then undoing it, and then trying different areas. So this really is a trial and error. And the nice thing about a digital platform is that you can undo. It's kind of hard to do with pencil crayons or designer markers on top of an image. It's easier to do in a digital world because you have that capability. So I've tried out the deck. I know the deck's going to be made out of wood, and I'm giving it that sort of wood tone quality, which is somewhere in that range. And now I'm going to pick up some areas of that deck and just push it a bit more so it stands out a bit more as a deck. And then I'll add some contrast to the walkways and the tables and all the different pieces. Now you can see there I'm highlighting the walkway. Again, I'm picking a neutral tone of gray. I had the wrong thickness at first, so I've adjusted that, undone it, and then color that area. And then I'm adding to the other walkways as well. I may want to add some texture to the walkway portion, for instance, add more texture to the actual pattern that may be in the walkway, or I may put something very generic. Here's something very, very generic and directional, just to show that there are some sort of pattern that's going to be associated with a walkway. It's not all really impressive, but it simply adds, again, that layer of texture. Now, as you can see, the more you add to this, the more you do, it just adds more to the overall effect. Your eye starts filling in what it should see and what looks correct in all of the areas that you've made mistakes. So to punch this a bit more, I'm adding some red, some color to the flowers that may be potentially in those locations. For now, we really don't care what plants we're using. We simply identify something that blossoms, something that is medium size, taller, shorter, wider, all of those kind of elements we're trying to identify and add texture to so there's a contrast. So in this little private seating area, I'm coloring up all the little parts and pieces of it just to make it look detailed. And you can see I'm not all that concerned about how accurate I am staying in between the lines or anything like that. And I'm simply identifying parts and pieces and then replicating them. So I picked a green, now I'm doing all the bushes and smaller plants, smaller greenery in that particular color. And then I'm going to fill in with some overall shading. In this particular case, I'm going to add a lighter. You can see the opacity level is really, really light, and I'm going to add this lighter shading into the design so it reads more like um, something that will have an effect on the mulch, on the background, on the areas in and around the trees. So I've picked my color. Now I'm going to add that color to the application. You can see I'm playing with different sort of ideas before I get something I really like. So I'll pick it out, try it out a bit. Now, if you're doing this manually, what you have to do is have a practice tracing paper over top of your image and try different techniques and then identify the technique you like. And then that will be on your final copy. Here, I have, like I said, that ability to undo. So I'm adding some mulch quality to in and around the gazebo. I'm adding it to the area of the planting to the southwest of the property. It's a very light tone. And I may want to change that, add to that, darken that up. I don't know yet. I'll just leave it the way it is. And now I'm going to fill in the patio in and around the private area along with the mulch. I like the color. I didn't like the color. I'll add a different color. I'll tone it. I'll adjust it. I'll change it. I'm looking for those contrasts. So every once in a while, you'll color something up and then just sit back and take a look at it and say, oh, okay, I can add a bit more here or a splash there, or just tone this here or tone that there, and come up with something that becomes a bit more, not so much as overly artistic or overly appealing, but something that simply identifies and contrasts the texture and the general colors of the different elements that you're putting together. And that will help read the project. That will help identify how you're combining all these elements together to get your final product. Now, once again, this isn't perfect. It's meant to go through a very quick sketch to put the project together, to take a look at it, and have something that is appealing enough that people will understand your notes.